Sometimes in Pokemon, something that seems completely useless or way too oddly specific can actually find the most random, niche use in competitive play, and be a genuinely viable choice. One of the silliest examples of this is that sometimes in competitive, there's a reason to use Riolu, the baby version of Lucario, instead of its fully evolved form, for a rather dastardly gimmick strategy. Why would you use Riolu over the clearly superior and fully evolved Lucario? Well, it's not for the usual reason that you might use a not fully evolved Pokemon. Some Pokemon like Chansey and Dusclops are viable compared to their fully evolved forms because of their access to the Eviolite item, which enhances defenses and can only be used by not fully evolved Pokemon. Riolu is not exactly a defensive titan though. No, the reason that you use Riolu over Lucario is for its unique ability, Prankster. Riolu gets this ability while Lucario does not, and this ability is significant. Prankster is an ability that grants +1 priority to non-damaging moves, and it's a very powerful ability indeed. This is one of the strongest utility effects in the game, and it can make otherwise terrible Pokemon genuinely viable, like Sableye and even Murkrow in the doubles formats. Riolu has access to the move Roar, which is not that special, many Pokemon do, but Roar is a great move that forces the enemy Pokemon to switch out. This can be great to remove their boosts, because of course switching removes boosts. It can also be great to rack up hazard damage. Entry hazards deal damage to the enemy as they switch in. So if you have Stealth Rock, Spikes, Toxic Spikes on the field, using Roar will force the enemy to switch and therefore take damage from all of those hazards. A downside to Roar is that it has negative priority, and this is part of its balance. If Roar did not have negative priority, you would be able to use it first in a turn with a faster Pokemon and prevent the enemy from acting, since they're forced to switch. This would actually be really overpowered. And you might be thinking, well, if the Pokemon has Prankster, don't they bypass the negative priority of Roar? Well, not quite, because Roar actually has -6 priority, and Prankster's effect only grants +1 priority to non-damaging moves. So Roar would still have -5 priority, operating well below the normal priority brackets. But there's a way around this, because Riolu happens to have the combination of Roar and Copycat. Copycat is a move, a non-damaging move, that just uses the last move used in a battle. And Copycat does not have any negative priority, so Copycat will have +1 priority from Prankster. And Copycat can crucially execute Roar without the negative priority effect. So this is a rare way to execute Roar first in a turn and force the enemy to repeatedly take hazard damage in some situations, winning the game entirely, because they can never act. They're always being forced to switch because you have priority and you're rolling them out every turn, and they are slowly dying to those Stealth Rocks and Spikes. This gimmicky strategy gives Riolu some genuine value over its father, Lucario, and against an unprepared opponent can single-handedly win the game. Riolu just equips itself with a Focus Sash so that it can guarantee itself taking 1 incoming hit. Then it uses Roar, which on the first turn will have negative priority, but from there it can just keep using Copycat, taking advantage of that priority Roar to slowly defeat the enemy by 1,000 cuts. Now this is a complete gimmick, and it may catch you off guard and lose you some games if you're not prepared for it, but there is a very easy way to defeat this, actually. The most obvious way to defeat this is with any priority move of your own. If you just have a +1 priority attack like Mach Punch or Quick Attack, you're probably going to be faster than Riolu. It's not a very fast Pokemon. So that will operate first, and then their Copycat is executing the last move used, which will just be your priority move. Way worse than executing Roar, forcing you to switch again, and ruining their strategy, because now they have to use Roar again, but of course they are too weak to do so and they will probably perish. So that just defeats this strategy easily. The other way to defeat this is just by using the move Protect. Protect has priority on it, and by using Protect, they will Copycat the Protect and ruin their strategy since they're not using Roar anymore. Now some teams don't run a priority attack on them. It's pretty common. Not every team can afford to run Mach Punch or Extreme Speed, But most teams in competitive singles will have a protect user. It's one of the most common utility moves in the game. So that is a very, very easy way to just get through this Riolu. Another way is through Sandstorm, because they're relying on the focus sash. So if you just hit them and they feint to Sandstorm, they no longer have the safety net to click Roar, and they're a weak little dog that cannot take an incoming hit very well. But still, it's impressive that this little dog, a seemingly inferior version of Lucario, can single-handedly solo entire teams in the right conditions. If you happen to match against someone with no priority and no protect, you kind of just win, don't you? When they said that every dog has their day, they meant it. You might not have expected Riolu to have its day, being such a small dog that is not very powerful looking, but it does have its day sometimes. And now there's evidence to prove that this is true, so you can't say it's not true either. Copycat has got to be one of the most interesting Pokemon moves, just executing the last move used in a battle. And there's a pretty fun recent example of Copycat having some relevance. Hisuian Samurott can use this move in Gen 9 OU as a bit of counterplay to Sticky Web leads. A Rabombi lead probably wants to set Sticky Web as soon as possible, and you can use Copycat on your Hisuian Samurott to match their Sticky Web and use it yourself, therefore kind of erasing the impact of it. If you're both got Sticky Web on the field, you'll both be lowering your speed every switch in, and it will even out to neutral. It's a pretty nice way to counter that, isn't it? The same can be done versus Araquanid, even though Araquanid's slower than you. You just wait until the next turn and then Copycat after they've used Sticky Web. Another move that's very similar to Copycat is Mimic. Mimic is a support move that will take the last move used in the battle and replace it with this one. So you won't just execute it on that turn, you will permanently gain the move for yourself. Now on the turn that you use Mimic, you are doing nothing, but this can be really interesting. Most of the time Mimic is too specific to be very useful, but there's one really awesome example of Mimic being a viable competitive option that I think is fun. Armaldo can make use of Mimic in Gen 3 for some pretty nice roll compression. First of all, Armaldo can use Mimic to copy spikes from Starmie. By copying spikes from Starmie, you can match their spikes and make some of your own, which actually really helps you from falling behind, and ensures that they aren't ahead of you in the spike war. Mimic can also be used to copy Curse from Snorlax. See, one of the advantages of Armaldo is that it is a great answer to Snorlax. That's because it has the ability Battle Armor, which makes it immune to critical hits. Armaldo can resist the normal type stab from Snorlax and shrugs off much of its other coverage. It's neutral to Earthquake and doesn't mind taking Shadow Ball either. Armaldo would sometimes run Harden just to boost its defense and match Snorlax's curse boosts, therefore preventing them from eventually breaking through it. Since Snorlax can't even critical hit to ignore your defensive boosts, it will slowly lose to you in a 1v1. Mimic sort of achieves the same thing, but you just instead copy Curse. And by copying Curse, you can match their defensive boosts and even boost your own attack as well. In doing so, you're achieving the same thing as Harden, but now Mimic gives you more options in other matchups, allowing you to copy spikes against Starmie as well. And maybe even there's other applications for Mimic, like copying Soft Boiled from Blissey or something to heal yourself. You never know where Mimic could come up. You can use it in many different contexts. But these are two matchups that Armaldo commonly finds itself in that actually can take good advantage of Mimic. What's interesting about Mimic as well is that when you switch out, it resets, and then when you switch back in, you no longer have the replaced move, you just have Mimic again. This makes the move versatile and allows you to mimic different things in different matchups. Have you ever heard of the item Float Stone? There's a good chance you haven't. Who's heard of this? What a boring item. The Float Stone will halve the weight of the Pokemon holding it. In-game, I can't imagine this having a very useful effect anywhere, aside from maybe enhancing your Pokemon's self-esteem a little bit. Who would use the Float Stone? Well, in competitive, there is a reason to use the Float Stone, in a very specific context. Weight usually doesn't have much impact on Pokemon, but there are some scenarios where weight does matter. Weight can affect the power of certain attacks, and some Pokemon also take damage from certain attacks based on how heavy they are. Low Kick is a prominent example, a fighting type physical move that deals damage based on the enemy's weight. This is a common move up in the Ubers tiers because a lot of legendaries happen to be really, really heavy. You might be thinking, wow, maybe legendaries can make use of the float stone to halve their weight and take less from low kick. That could be relevant. Well, the problem is that it's so specific. You're specifically better against low kick. And low kick is not always the fighting stab of choice used up in Ubers. Close combat, high jump kick, and other fighting type attacks are used as well. It might be useful sometimes, but you really want to use it in a situation where the most common coverage move of a type, or one of the most common, is going to be a weight-based move, which is a very specific set of criteria indeed. But there is a scenario where using the float stone actually feels worth it sometimes, and that's in the Gen 5 metagame on the Pokemon Gastrodon. Another one of the most prominent weight-based attacks is Grass Knot. Grass Knot is a special attack that deals damage based on the enemy's weight. The heavier they are, the higher the power of Grass Knot. And Grass Knot is actually one of the most common grass-type coverage moves in Gen 5 OU. Alakazam pretty commonly carries Grass Knot. It hits a lot of popular water types in the tier for super effective damage. It hits Tyranitar for pretty massive damage, since Tyranitar is a heavy Godzilla-adjacent creature. And even though it's not necessarily aiming to target Gastrodon, it certainly does when Gastrodon shows itself. Gastrodon is ×4 weak to grass. So Alakazam with Grass Knot is a nightmare for Gastrodon. Thunderous Therian also carries Grass Knot for coverage occasionally, and that is to hit ground types. Starmie can also get Grass Knot. It's not as common, but Starmie is pretty damn worried about Gastrodon, isn't it? Gastrodon is immune to water and electric, which are two of Starmie's biggest coverage options, and it can shrug off Ice Beam too. So a Grass Knot is great against Gastrodon, if that happens to be a problem matchup for you. And some other users of Grass Knot are more niche, like Latios and Jirachi, who would maybe sometimes use it, but probably would just prefer to hit water types and ground types with big stab damage instead, rather than opting for the move slot spent on coverage that they don't really need. But still, Grass Knot has multiple prevalent users here. And with a Float Stone, Gastrodon actually halves the incoming damage from the move, doesn't it? By halving its own weight, the power of Grass Knot directly decreases as a result. And it's kind of like having a permanent Rindo Berry, isn't it? The Rindo Berry is a one-time use berry that halves incoming damage from a grass move. Well, the Float Stone is halving damage from Grass Knot every single time. Now, Gastrodon is sacrificing its item slot for this, which might be a leftovers or something useful, but it can still function well enough without the leftovers. And sometimes, if you're struggling against those particular matchups, against the Grass Knot coverage, the Float Stone can be worthwhile. It's very niche. You're probably going to opt for leftovers more often, but sometimes, on a certain team where these Grass Knot users are a particular problem for you, maybe you opt for the Float Stone, and maybe that's actually valuable. The Float Stone is also very useful for halving the weight of your muck. I don't know about you, but I never leave the house without my muck. I consider it to be an essential item, so halving the weight makes it much more comfortable for me to just live my life. This makes it one of the more valued items in my personal experience. Did you know that sometimes having an actively terrible ability can be an advantage in competitive Pokemon? It's true. The ability Klutz seems like it has no upside whatsoever, and all downside. Klutz is an ability that causes your held item to have no effect. Why would anyone want this? Don't you want your held item to have an effect? Isn't that the point of a held item? Well, there's one instance where you might not want your held item to have an effect, and that is if it's an item with a negative effect. Like the item Sticky Barb, for example. Sticky Barb is an item that deals 1/8 of your max HP to the holder every single turn. Why would you want to equip this in the first place? Well, if the enemy makes contact with you, they will receive the Sticky Barb, if they don't already have an item. So it can actually be good in that sense to not take damage from it until the enemy makes contact and steals it from you. That's not that great though. It's very specific. They have to have no item, and they also have to make contact with you. Maybe they won't do that. Not all moves make contact. So it's not great, and you're also not benefiting from a held item you could be having that whole time. But it's some reason to use Klutz, isn't it? The ability is not completely valueless. The most valuable reason to use Klutz, though, is with the item Assault Vest. Assault Vest is an interesting item. Assault Vest grants a 1.5x special defense boost, but It means you can only select damaging moves. You can only use attacks. It's a great item, and a lot of Pokemon use this item for the special defense boost and just run a set with only attacks, which is fine oftentimes. Attacks are powerful, of course. Now, it would be really valuable to trick this item or switcheroo this item onto an enemy so that they can't use their support moves anymore. This would destroy just about any utility Pokemon and make them completely useless. But the problem is that while you have the Assault Vest equipped, you can't use Trick or Switcheroo because it's a non-damaging move. You can only use damaging moves. That is, unless you have the ability Klutz, which means that the held item has no effect at all. Yes, you don't benefit from the special defense boost, obviously, because it has no effect, but you also aren't affected by the drawback. And you can select status moves. So Lopunny here has the ability Klutz and the move Switcheroo. So Lopunny is the only Pokemon in the game that can give an enemy the Assault Vest and ruin their career instantaneously in the right circumstance, preventing them from using any of their non-damaging moves. If Blissey receives the Assault Vest, or Skarmory receives the Assault Vest, or any defensive support Pokemon receives an Assault Vest, their career is over instantaneously, especially if they can no longer heal. Now, Lopunny is obviously not a great Pokemon to begin with. It's ranked in lower tiers usually, but in lower tiers, you can use this. You can use the Klutz Assault Vest combo to absolutely ruin a Pokemon's life. So sometimes having a bad ability can be good, like in this instance. Another case where having a bad ability can be good is in the case of Durant, an often forgotten ant-themed Pokemon. Durant has the ability True Ant, because he is the truest ant that has ever existed. With the ability True Ant, you are at an active disadvantage beyond anything. You will skip every other turn. You'll be completely inactive on every other turn, which is horrendous. The most famous Pokemon with this ability is Slacking, and it's given this ability as an active handicap, because Slacking has fantastic stats, but it is reined in by this debilitating ability that prevents it from acting on every single other turn. So why the hell would Durant choose to have Truant when it just has Swarm, which is a far better ability that is not actively disadvantageous? Seems stupid to give this Pokemon a bad ability when it has good abilities right there. Well, Durant here has a move called Entrainment, and Entrainment will actually grant the enemy with the same ability that you have. Their ability will be changed to match yours. So you can have Truant and then give the enemy Truant. Not only does this erase their ability, which might be a really good one, like Magic Guard or Poison Heal or something, you get rid of that ability, and now, not only do they lose the effects of that great ability, they have the worst ability ever, and on every other turn, they are completely immobile. This can ruin a Pokemon's life, and force them out of their Boost Sweeper, allow you to completely easily defeat them, because they're Truanting. But there's another way that this could be abused too. You can use this Entrainment Durant and then switch into a Trapper. And this is where things get very interesting. In the past, Dugtrio was legal back in Gen 7, and you could do something a little bit diabolical. You could Entrainment, give the enemy Truant, and then go to your Dugtrio, and now they are, every other turn, completely inactive. So on every single turn where they would damage you, you just Protect. And then on every turn where they're inactive, you boost yourself up with Hone Claws. Eventually, since you are completely indestructible and you can Protect on every single time they attempt to hit you, you can just max out your attack with Dugtrio and then substitute to shield you from an incoming hit as well. Then you just sweep the entire enemy team, because you're maxed out with your attack. Now, Dugtrio did eventually get banned, not because of this, for other reasons. Although this is, I suppose, quite a valid reason to maybe add to the list of ban reasons, but you can still pull this off with a Magnet Pull Pokemon. Magnet Pull is a legal trapping effect because it only traps Steel types specifically. So if you manage to use Entrainment, give a Steel type Truant, and then switch in a Magnet Pull Pokemon, you can achieve much the same thing. Are there any good Magnet Pull Pokemon with boosting moves? Well, the best candidate is probably Alolan Golem. Against a trapped Steel type of any kind, Alolan Golem can do something kind of funny here. You can spam the move Curse until you have maximum attack and defense, which is obviously great. But then, you're really slow, because you have all of these negative speed boosts from how much you've used Curse. But because the enemy against you is so completely helpless and can't do anything, you can just automatize to raise your speed all the way back up, not only to erase your speed decreases, but get all the way up to maximum speed. So you get maximum speed, attack, and defense. This leaves you with just one move slot for an attack, but a simple rock stab move will probably do the trick if you have literally max attack. I think Rock Blast is probably the best choice because it can bypass effects that might defeat you like Sturdy, Focus Sash, Multi-Scale, etc. This is the greatest gimmick ever. It's such a specific series of events that have to happen. You got a Truant, entrainment against a steel type and switch this guy in. But if you manage to do those things, it's an instant victory, I think. Unless they can somehow, with one of their Pokemon, live a +6 Rock Blast from Alolan Golem, who also has max speed. I guess Durant is a true ant after all. Ants work as a conglomerate. They are team players. By engaging in a bit of suffering himself, he is enhancing the power of Alolan Golem for the slam dunk finish that we've all been waiting for. It's a very altruistic Pokemon, Durant, a very forward-thinking Pokemon as well. Certainly the truest ant I've ever known. The funniest example I'm aware of a Pokemon running a deliberately bad ability on purpose in competitive is the case of Ponyta in Gen 3 ZU, a controversial Pokemon that many think I shouldn't feature on the channel here for all the terrible acts he's committed, but I'm someone who tends to separate the art from the artist, especially in this case. Anyway, Ponyta has two abilities to choose from. One of them is Run Away, which has no competitive use, and one of them is Flash Fire, which offers a complete immunity to fire-type attacks and a boost to your fire-type damage if hit by one. The choice seems obvious, right? Literal immunity to an entire type of damage plus a damage boost, or nothing. Why would you ever choose nothing? Why would you ever choose Run Away? Well, amazingly, sometimes Ponyta chooses Run Away in Gen 3 ZU. Why the hell would this be the case? Is it to give Run Away to the enemy? Is there some hidden use for this that I haven't seen? No. No, Ponyta has no way to skill swap with the enemy or give them this ability to erase theirs. Nothing like that. The reason that Ponyta wants to use Run Away in Gen 3 ZU is to counter the Pokemon Porygon. Porygon is a great Pokemon in Gen 3 ZU, and a common choice with its nice neutral normal typing, good stats for the tier, great move pool, diverse options, and its ability Trace, which on switch in will copy the enemy ability. And what Porygon can do is switch right into Ponyta, trace its ability Flash Fire, and then gain fire immunity itself, so that Ponyta's fire type moves are completely ineffective against it. And that is the reason Ponyta will sometimes choose to run away. Because in the instance that a Porygon switches in and expects to trace Flash Fire for an incredibly advantageous position, where it is immune to fire type damage completely, now it's tracing Run Away, which has no use whatsoever and leaves it wide open to those fire type moves that it thought it was about to be safe against. Because who in their right mind would run the ability Run Away? Well, Porygon was common enough to justify this sometimes. If you're using Ponyta as a win condition, as a sweeper, the easy Porygon answer was a bit of a problem, wasn't it? So this is a funny reason that Ponyta runs an ability with genuinely no competitive use, so that the enemy can't copy its ability for an advantage, instead copying nothing. This makes me feel better about myself. I don't think I have any competitive use, but sometimes that can be good if I'm in the Porygon matchup. How absolutely wonderful for me. I think one of the most interesting moves in Pokemon history is Reflect Type. There's a chance you've never heard of this move. It is usually not very useful, but it is extremely cool. Reflect Type will allow the user to change into the same type as the target. How fun is that? It's like a primitive version of terrestrialization, kind of. A way for you to change your type. Usually not very useful though. Becoming the same type as the enemy, which requires a whole turn in this case, is not always useful. You can't guarantee what enemy you're up against. Are you even going to benefit from those new types? It's a lot of questions that don't have great answers. And is that all worth an entire move slot? But there's one Pokemon that probably takes the greatest advantage of Reflect Type in Pokemon history, and that is Starmie. Starmie can use Reflect Type to great effect for multiple different purposes. Starmie is a Water Psychic type, leaving it vulnerable to some specific Pokemon in various OU formats. Ferrothorn is a big one. Ferrothorn being a grass type, of course, who can switch in against Starmie, shrug off all its coverage, and deal super effective damage with Power Whip. This is also relevant because Starmie is a rapid spinner, meaning it removes hazards, and Ferrothorn is a hazard setter. So a hazard setter that threatens a rapid spinner is a big deal. This means Starmie is going to be less safe actually removing hazards when it's threatened by the enemy's hazard setter. That is, unless you use the move Reflect type against Ferrothorn and change yourself from a water psychic type into a grass steel type. Now, what do you know? Ferrothorn can't touch you. You've gained resistance to grass, and the incoming Power Whip, or Gyro Ball, or whatever, even Leech Seed, is going to be completely useless now. And you can even Rapid Spin against them now. You might take a bit of Iron Barb's chip damage, but you'll be fine. The bigger concern, which is that massive Power Whip, is no longer a concern. Believe it or not, Starmie has some Reflect type value it can achieve in other matchups too. Scizor is a big one. Scizor is a Bug Steel type that can threaten Starmie with a big Stab U-turn, or the move Pursuit to trap and eliminate Starmie in some contexts. Unless you Reflect type, transform into a Bug Steel type, and now you can safely stomach just about anything Scizor can do. I don't think Scizor gets a fire move of any kind, so Starmie is totally safe now. There's also Tyranitar. Tyranitar is commonly going to try and trap and eliminate Starmie with Pursuit as well. And Tyranitar is particularly good at this with its extra special defense in the sand to stomach Starmie's water type attacks. Tyranitar might also choose to carry a Pasho Berry to further shield itself from water type damage. In Gen 6 it can even carry an Assault Vest. But if Starmie Reflect type against Tyranitar, it will be resistant to Dark and no longer vulnerable to that Pursuit trap, and now it can just safely switch out and not be worried at all about the Pursuit damage. It also gets Sand immunity temporarily from that, which is fun. This is such a fun one, and it's sort of a primitive version of defensive terrestrialization if you think about it, isn't it? It's not common that a Pokemon can use this move effectively, but Starmie happens to have multiple matchups where changing into the type of the Pokemon in front of it happens to save it from death. There are multiple matchups where that's the case. So there you go, Reflect type is a good option on Starmie. And finally, I think it'd be fun to showcase another awesome utility move that sees occasional use in competitive. The move Skill Swap. Skill Swap has the effect of switching your ability with the enemy's ability. And this has a lot of fun application. The most common way in competitive to use Skill Swap is to bypass Magic Bounce. Magic Bounce is a great ability, with the effect of bouncing back various things to the opponent, most notably hazards. If you use Stealth Rock or Spikes against a Magic Bounce Pokemon, not only will it not work, the hazards won't be on their side of the field, they're going to bounce back to your side of the field. It's a terrible scenario. But if you Skill Swap, now you have Magic Bounce, and they can no longer prevent your hazards from going up. So a hazard setting lead like Deoxys Speed enjoys the move Skill Swap to sometimes help it more consistently set its hazards. But my personal favorite use of Skill Swap that I've seen that is used in Gen 9 OU sometimes is on Blissey. Now what's fun about this is that Blissey can also use Skill Swap for the Magic Bounce thing. You can Skill Swap against a Hatterene and then Stealth Rock against them. Blissey gets Stealth Rock too. But something that's great about Blissey with Skill Swap is that it can be a great answer to Gliscor. Gliscor has the ability Poison Heal, which makes it so that Poison, instead of dealing damage to your Pokemon, will heal your Pokemon for 1/8 of their HP. It's an incredibly good ability. What Blissey can do is not only temporarily disable Poison Heal, which is dreadful for Gliscor because they are self-poisoning with Toxic Orb and now taking damage from the thing that's supposed to heal them. So it does that, which is great, but also the ability that you give them is Natural Cure, Blissey's ability. And Natural Cure makes it so that if you switch out, you will cure your status condition. Usually you wouldn't want to give this to an enemy because it's good, they get to heal status. But Gliscor wants to be status, it wants to be poisoned. So by giving them Natural Cure, you're not only disabling their Poison Heal right then, which eventually forces them to switch out, as soon as they switch out, they're going to cure their own poison, which is bad for them. And now you've actually dealt with Gliscor very well. They no longer get their chip heal or status immunity that comes along with self-poisoning. The problem is that they might still have a Toxic Orb equipped, meaning they can just protect for a turn and self-inflict poison again. But if you manage to knock off their toxic orb, this is great. Usually Gliscor doesn't mind getting knocked off. In fact, it switches in on knockoff because if it's already poisoned itself, it doesn't need its item. Except in this case. If you knock off a Gliscor's toxic orb, skill swap natural cure to them, then you've removed Gliscor from being able to take advantage of its best trait, its poison heal ability. And it's a pretty great way to answer Gliscor, actually. Gliscor might want to be in on Blissey. It seems to match up well against it. It has knockoff to remove its item, and Earthquake for big physical pressure against Blissey. And it is not worried about status or anything, of course. So this can work pretty well. You can skill swap Gliscor after knocking them off previously and deal with one of the strongest defensive Pokemon in Gen 9 OU. This is fairly similar to a strategy I covered in a previous video, which was the Trick Pecha Berry Goldengo, which would deliberately give Gliscor a Pecha Berry to not only get rid of its toxic orb, but heal the poison, removing it from being able to take advantage of Poison Heal. This is a similar idea. You're removing Poison Heal from them, though, this time with Skill Swap, and then giving them Natural Cure so that they cure their own poison and screw themselves over. Probably the most fun and creative way I've seen to apply the move Skill Swap, which is a fantastic move design. I love this kind of thing. It makes for such interesting situations, doesn't it? As evidenced by the one I've covered here. So there you have it, folks. Some examples of fun, niche strategies in competitive Pokemon. Making use of effects that would seem completely useless, but have a weird, specific use in competitive context, which I always think is so fun and interesting. Which was your favorite example here? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you very much for watching.